Richie Merzian, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Deforestation agreement today, 2030. What do you make of that, first of all?
Look, it's a good sign. Like, one of the key steps to solving climate change is stop cutting down so many trees, start planting more. You need to get that done, but it only goes halfway to really getting us across the line, which is really closing that big emissions gap to 2030.
All right, now you've done something pretty provocative at the Australia Institute. Some might even call it unpatriotic, these ads against Australia in the Scottish and Italian papers. Why have you done that?
Well, I mean, maybe you'd call it the Australian way. It's actually having your say. Really, Australia is here, and Minister Taylor is here to spruik fossil fuels. He's even said as much in terms of the impact of the net zero plan. Our ads are saying that net zero by 2050 is a fraud if fossil fuels flourish. The main source of greenhouse gas emissions is fossil fuels. Australia wants to dig up and export more. You can't have it both ways. If Australia is serious about dealing with climate change, it's got to keep those fossil fuels in the ground. No new coal, no new gas. That's what the International Energy Agency says, and that's what we're saying.
All right, well, technology, not taxes. I mean, I'm sick of hearing about it, but haven't they got a point when they say China and India, a lot of poor people need electricity, haven't got power, a lot of people, and if it's coal-fired is the cheapest, they'll go for that. Haven't they got a point when they say we need this cheaper renewable energy?
I mean, the only time they care about poor people is when they can sell them some fossil fuels. India came here and actually pledged to go net zero. That's the first time they've done that. The Indian Prime Minister...
By 2070?
Yeah, by 2070. But as you said, they're still electrifying their country. So shouldn't we give them a bit more space? Australia's a wealthy country. We're one of the biggest emitters in the world, one of the biggest exporters of fossil fuels. And we've come here giving cover to China to do nothing by doing nothing ourselves instead of leading with the UK and the US. I think that has actually been disastrous for Australia because it's found itself in the wrong end of the G20.
But net zero by 2050, we're saying that. That's not nothing, is it?
Well, it's empty, though. There's no details, there's no analysis, it's not going to be accountable or legislated. It's pretty much worthless because at the same time, they're looking at technology that doesn't exist or has failed. Angus Taylor's in here promoting carbon capture and storage, a colossal failure, over $4 billion of taxpayer money committed, and nothing to show for it when it comes to clean coal. You can't call that a serious plan.
What should the 2030 target be then, in your view, for Australia?
It should at least be halving emissions by 2030. That's what the New South Wales Coalition committed to. That's what the US administration committed to. Really, it should go further than that. And also, they've come here saying we can meet and beat our target. That's a sign that they've picked a weak target, and they could be doing a lot more, and they should be committing to that.
Do you need a carbon tax to get to the sort of target you're talking about?
Look, carbon tax is just one of many ways you can do it. Really what you need is a serious plan. You need an accountable target, and that's what we're missing right now. We could be going ahead and using the existing technologies in renewables, in electric vehicles to actually change our emissions now. We're not. We're playing funny buggers with technologies like carbon capture and storage that only support the fossil fuel industry.
Now, you've worked for the Australian government before in these sorts of talks, right? Can you take us through what it's like being at the negotiating table?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great privilege to be able to negotiate for Australia at these talks. And ultimately, it will grind out for the next 2 weeks. The package will only come together in the last few hours, and it's consensus-based, which means every country has to agree. So if one country is being an absolute holdout, it brings everyone else down. And that's why it's so important having leaders here to peer pressure each other to do more, because if we don't, we're going to fail this challenge.
So you think Scott Morrison should have stayed longer?
Well, definitely Minister Taylor should stay the entire 2 weeks. That would be a good sign that Australia's here for the long haul. Instead, it seems like most of the ministers are skipping out this week.
And it used to be the way prior to Paris that people would come here and work out their target here. Was that a better process for a more ambitious target than arriving with your target?
Well, look, you want countries to come here willing to listen and learn and engage and go forward. Like, what would have been great for Australia, if it can't commit to a 2030 target, at least open up that conversation. Say, look, we recognise that maybe it was a bit weak because we've definitely meet and beat it. Let's revisit it. We promise to re-look at that. Maybe we'll take a new mandate forward for the next election. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister has closed even that option, and that's just undefensible.
All right, but if China do net zero 2060, India 2070... aren't these talks a bit of a failure?
Well, no, not really. I mean, ultimately, Australia should be comparing itself to other wealthy, industrialised countries. We often do that for everything else except climate change.
But I'm talking about global emissions. I mean, it's not achieving what Boris Johnson wanted it to achieve, right?
Well, what Boris Johnson wants is ultimately for everyone to have a pathway to get to net zero, and for the first time ever, the third largest emitter in the world has said that they'll do that. Brazil, another major emitter, has upped its initial efforts as well. This is an incremental process. You're going to get bit by bit. It's not the end of it. We're going to have another COP and another COP and another COP, because obviously this hasn't solved everything. Would have liked to see more. Hopefully we'll see more in the next 2 weeks, but there's going to be further COPs.
Richie, Merzian, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure.